Spite is an excellent motivator. I wanted to burn my mother's pristine corporate empire to the ground, so I put a wedding ring on a tired mechanic who smelled like motor oil and stale coffee. I didn't know the grease on his hands was a distraction from the deeds in his pocket. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, emitting a low, mechanical hum that always gave me a migraine by 3 in the afternoon. My corner office was supposed to be a sanctuary, perched 50 stories above the Chicago streets. But right now, the air felt thick, tasting faintly of ozone and my mother's suffocating gardenia perfume. Villette Phillips did not sit. She hovered. She paced. She owned the carpet she walked on, and she made sure everyone in the room knew it. I sat behind my desk, a slab of reclaimed walnut I'd bought specifically because she called it hideous and unrefined, and tried to focus on the rhythmic clicking of my own fingernails against my ceramic coffee mug. The coffee was lukewarm, acidic. I swallowed a mouthful anyway, just to give myself something to do, besides snap at her. "It's a simple arrangement, Nari," Villette said, pausing by the floor-to-ceiling window. She didn't look out at the skyline. She looked at her own reflection in the glass. "Gallagher Logistics has the supply chain infrastructure we need. Richard Gallagher has a son. You have a ring finger. The board is already drafting the merger announcement." I set the mug down. It landed with a dull thud. "I am the chief executive officer of this company, Mother. You are a majority shareholder. You do not draft merger announcements without my signature, and you certainly don't auction off my uterus to secure a shipping route." Villette finally turned. Her suit was Chanel, immaculately tailored, a pale cream color that somehow never picked up a speck of dirt. Her smile was thin, a practiced curving of the lips that didn't reach her eyes. "You are CEO because I allow it. You play at being a modern, independent woman. But we both know who controls the voting block. If you don't marry Preston Gallagher, I will call a special vote on Friday. I will strip you of your title, liquidate your pet divisions, and put someone in your chair who understands duty." My stomach seized, a sharp, twisting cramp that I forced myself to ignore. She meant it. She had spent the last 30 years turning our family name into a weapon, and she would absolutely use it to cut me down. I could feel the familiar, pathetic surge of childhood panic rising in my throat, the desperate urge to yield, to apologize, to seek her approval. I hated that feeling. I hated her for instilling it in me. "Preston Gallagher is an idiot," I said, my voice coming out flatter and calmer than I felt. "He crashed his Porsche into a bakery last month and tried to sue the baker." "He is malleable," Villette corrected smoothly, "and his father holds the keys to the Midwest distribution network. You will smile, you will wear the dress I select, and you will sign the marriage license. You have 3 weeks." She walked out, the heavy glass door clicking shut behind her with terrifying finality. I sat in the silence for a long time, the smell of gardenias lingering like toxic gas. My pulse pounded in my ears. 3 weeks to lose my freedom, or lose the company I had bled for, the company I had built into something functional while she was busy attending galas. I grabbed my coat. I needed to breathe air that didn't belong to her. I drove aimlessly, the leather steering wheel slick under my damp palms. The city passed in a blur of grey concrete and flashing brake lights. I ended up on the south side, pulling my Audi into the cracked, pothole-ridden parking lot of a diner that looked like it hadn't updated its health code certificate since 1998. The neon sign buzzed, half the letters burned out, spelling DNR. I pushed the heavy glass door open. The bell above it jingled, a cheap, tinny sound. The air inside was heavy with the smell of old frying oil, bleach, and burnt filter coffee. It was exactly what I needed. No one in here cared about stock prices or supply chain logistics. I slid into a vinyl booth that had been patched with duct tape, the tape scratched against the back of my silk trousers. I didn't care. I buried my face in my hands, letting the exhaustion wash over me. I needed a plan. If I married Preston, I was Villette's puppet forever. If I didn't, I lost my life's work. Unless I was already married. The thought hit me like a physical blow, a preemptive strike. Villette couldn't force a marriage if I already had a husband. But it couldn't just be anyone. It had to be someone so entirely unsuitable, so completely divorced from her world of high society and corporate leverage that it would humiliate her. It would render the Gallagher merger instantly void, because Richard Gallagher would never associate his family with a public joke. Rough day. I looked up. A man was standing by the edge of my table, holding a stained coffee pot. He looked to be in his late 30s. His jaw was dark with a few days of stubble, and his dark hair was pushed back carelessly, curling slightly at the ends. He wore a faded thermal Henley under an unzipped, oil-stained mechanic's jacket. His hands were large, knuckles calloused and smeared with a faint shadow of grease that soap hadn't quite managed to scrub away. "You could say that," I muttered, sitting up straight and adjusting my blazer, suddenly hyper-aware of how out of place my $4,000 outfit looked against the duct-taped booth. He didn't judge. He just turned over the heavy ceramic mug on my table and filled it with steaming black sludge. "Drink it," he said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that vibrated over the ambient noise of the diner. "It tastes like battery acid, but it'll wake you up." "Thanks," I murmured. He nodded and turned to walk away. As he did, a small boy, maybe 6 years old, came barreling out from behind the counter, clutching a battered plastic dinosaur. Dad, look, the leg fell off again." The kid held up the broken toy, his face smeared with what looked like grape jelly. The man knelt down, his entire demeanor softening in a way that made my chest tighten strangely. He took the dinosaur, examining the broken plastic with absolute seriousness. "We'll fix it, Leo. Let me finish my shift, and I'll grab the super glue from the shop. Go finish your math." "Math is stupid," Leo grumbled, but he took the dinosaur and trudged back behind the counter. The man sighed, dragging a hand down his face, revealing a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. He looked over at me, catching me staring. He didn't look embarrassed, just tired. "Single dad?" I asked, before I could filter myself. "Something like that," he said. He glanced at the clock on the wall, checking the time. He looked like a man carrying the weight of the world, struggling to make rent, struggling to buy superglue for a plastic dinosaur. An idea formed in my head. A terrible, brilliant, desperate idea. He needed money. I needed a husband, a mechanic, with a kid. Villette would have a stroke. "Excuse me," I said, my voice suddenly sharp, businesslike. "What's your name?" He paused, looking back at me with narrowed eyes. "Adelbert." "Adelbert," I repeated. The name felt solid, real. "When does your shift end? I have a business proposition for you." The mechanic's shop was exactly what I had expected. A cavernous, poorly lit garage smelling sharply of gasoline, rubber tires, and damp concrete. Rain was starting to spit outside, hitting the tin roof in a sporadic, annoying rhythm. I stepped carefully around a puddle of dark oil, my heels clicking sharply against the cement. Adalbert was under the hood of a rusted sedan. All I could see were his boots and the lower half of his jeans. "Adalbert," I called out. He slid out, wiping his hands on a filthy rag. He didn't look surprised to see me, which was annoying. I was used to putting people off balance. Instead, he just leaned against the fender of the car, crossing his arms. The faded Henley pulled tight across his chest. Up close, I noticed his eyes, a striking pale grey, intelligent and assessing. They didn't fit the oil stains. "The lady from the diner," he said, with the business proposition. "Nari Phillips," I said, holding out my hand. He looked at my hand, then down at his own grease-covered fingers. He didn't take it. "Adalbert James. What do you want, Nari Phillips?" I dropped my hand, feeling a flush of heat in my cheeks. "Is there somewhere private we can talk?" He led me to a small office partitioned off by grimy glass. The space was claustrophobic, containing a battered metal desk, a few filing cabinets, and a framed drawing of a lopsided house in crayon. Leo's work, obviously. I sat on the only available chair, avoiding a stack of unpaid invoices. I opened my briefcase, the leather squeaking in the quiet room. I pulled out a thick manila folder and laid it on the desk between us. "I'll get straight to the point," I said, locking my eyes on his. "I am the CEO of Phillips Industries. I am currently facing a hostile takeover from my own mother, who is attempting to force me into a marriage to secure a corporate merger. I refuse to be leveraged. But if I am legally married to someone else before she finalizes her plans, her leverage evaporates." Adalbert stared at me. He reached out, picked up a pen from the desk, and turned it over in his hands. The plastic clicked. "You want to hire a husband?" "I want to hire you," I corrected. 2 years. On paper, it will look real. You will move into my penthouse. We will make a few public appearances. In exchange, I will deposit $2 million into a trust for your son and pay you a salary of $50,000 a month. When we divorce, you walk away cleanly, with enough capital to start your own garage, buy a house, whatever you want. I waited for the shock, the stammering disbelief, the desperate gratitude. Adalbert didn't blink. He opened the folder with a thumb smudged with engine grease and scanned the first page. His eyes flicked down the legal jargon with surprising speed. "A prenup, obviously," he murmured, his voice infuriatingly calm. "I get nothing of your existing assets. No alimony. Strict non-disclosure agreement. If I speak to the press, I forfeit the monthly salary." He flipped the page. "And Leo? He lives with us?" "I have a guest wing," I said, trying not to sound defensive. "He'll have his own space. I've already looked into private schools in the area. The tuition is covered." Adalbert closed the folder. He leaned back in his chair, the springs groaning in protest. He looked at me, really looked at me, his gaze stripping away the expensive suit, the blowout, the rehearsed confidence. It felt invasive. "Why me?" he asked. "Because you need the money," I said bluntly. I gestured around the cramped office. "Because you're struggling, and because my mother is an elitist snob who will be absolutely horrified by the fact that I married a man who fixes carburetors for a living. You are the ultimate insult." I expected him to be offended. Instead, a slow, wry smile touched the corner of his mouth. It was a dangerous smile, a smile that suggested he knew a joke I didn't. The ultimate insult, he repeated, tasting the words. All right, Nari Phillips, I'll marry you to ruin your mother's plans. Relief washed over me, a physical slackening of my shoulders. Excellent. I'll have my lawyers. But Adalbert interrupted, leaning forward. The shift in his posture made the small room feel even smaller. I have conditions. I'm not negotiating the payout, I snapped. I don't care about the payout, he said softly. Condition 1. My son is not a prop. You will treat Leo with respect, and you will not parade him in front of cameras to make yourself look like a philanthropist. Condition 2. We live as equals in your house. I am not your employee. If I'm playing your husband, I will not be ordered around like the hired help. Condition 3. You don't lie to me. I frowned, bristling at his tone. He sounded less like a desperate mechanic and more like a board member dictating terms. I don't lie. I'm a businesswoman. Adalbert chuckled, a low, scraping sound. Businessmen lie for a living. You want my signature? Those are the terms. He wasn't intimidated by me. Not in the slightest. It was irritating, but I didn't have time to find a more compliant candidate. I pulled a sleek silver pen from my pocket and handed it to him. Agreed, I said. He took the pen, his fingers brushing mine. His skin was rough, calloused, radiating a surprising amount of heat. He signed the bottom of the preliminary agreement in a sharp, slashing script. We get married on Thursday, I said, standing up and smoothing my skirt. Buy a suit. Nothing too expensive. I want my mother to notice the poor tailoring. I'll do my best to look pathetic, Adalbert replied dryly, handing back the folder. As I walked out into the damp Chicago air, I felt a tremor of unease beneath my ribs. I had exactly what I wanted. A watertight contract, a human shield. But as I thought about the sharp intelligence in Adalbert's grey eyes, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just negotiated with a man who was playing a completely different game. The courthouse smelled intensely of floor wax and anxious sweat. We sat on a wooden bench outside the judge's chambers, listening to the muffled drone of a hearing taking place inside. Adalbert sat next to me. He had followed my instructions, sort of. He wore a dark navy suit that was clearly off the rack, but to my annoyance, it fit him reasonably well across the shoulders. He had shaved, revealing a strong, angular jaw, and his hair was slicked back, though a few rebellious strands had already fallen across his forehead. He didn't look pathetic. He looked rugged. Leo sat on Adalbert's other side, swinging his legs, engrossed in a handheld video game. He was wearing a tiny clip-on tie. "Are you shaking?" Adalbert asked, his voice low. I clamped my hands together in my lap, furious that he had noticed. "No, I'm just cold." Adalbert didn't argue. He just shifted closer, his arm brushing mine, offering a solid line of heat against my shivering frame. I stiffened, but I didn't pull away. Nari. The sharp, venomous hiss echoed down the sterile hallway. I jerked my head up. Villette was striding toward us, her heels clicking like gunshots on the linoleum. Two of her corporate lawyers trailed behind her like oversized, anxious puppies. Her face was a mask of tightly controlled fury, her knuckles white as she gripped a sleek leather clutch. "What is the meaning of this?" Villette demanded, stopping a few feet away. She didn't look at Adalbert. She barely looked at me. She was vibrating with rage. "I got a call from the clerk's office. You filed for a marriage license. Have you lost your mind?" I stood up, forcing my spine straight. I'm getting married, mother. It's exactly what you wanted. Villette's eyes finally slid to Adalbert. She took him in. The cheap suit, the rough hands, the kid with the video game. Her upper lip curled in pure, unadulterated disgust. Who is this? Some charity case you picked up to throw a tantrum. You think this changes anything? I will have this annulled before the ink is dry. I will freeze your accounts, Nari. I will bury you so deep. She stepped forward, lifting a hand, pointing a manicured finger aggressively at my face. Before I could react, Adalbert stood. He didn't rush. He moved with a lazy, heavy grace, stepping deliberately between me and my mother. He towered over Villette, but he didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Lower your hand, Adalbert said. The command was spoken softly, but the tone carried an absolute chilling authority that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't the voice of a mechanic defending a customer. It was the voice of a man who was used to giving orders that were instantly obeyed. Villette froze. Her eyes snapped up to Adalbert's face. For a fraction of a second, I saw something flicker in her expression. Not recognition, exactly, but a sudden, instinctual hesitation. She slowly lowered her hand. You have no idea who you are dealing with, Villette sneered at him, recovering her composure. I know exactly who I'm dealing with. Mrs. Phillips, Adalbert replied, a cold smile touching his lips. And I suggest you leave before my wife's wedding day is ruined by a trespassing charge. Villette stared at him, her chest heaving. She looked at me one last time, eyes promising absolute war, before turning on her heel and marching away, her lawyers scrambling to keep up. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My knees felt weak. How did you do that? I whispered. Adalbert turned back to me, the coldness vanishing from his face, replaced by his usual tired calm. Bullies only respond to pushback, he said simply. Come on, the judge is ready. The ceremony was a blur of legal jargon and paperwork. Within 15 minutes, I was Nari Phillips James. We walked out of the courthouse into the fading afternoon light, the heavy reality of what I had just done settling onto my chest like a lead weight. We need to celebrate, I announced, trying to regain control of the situation. I made a reservation, dinner. I took them to an exclusive, impossibly pretentious steakhouse in River North. It was the kind of place where the menu didn't have prices, and the lighting was so dim you could barely see your dining companion. I wanted to see Adalbert out of his element. I wanted to remind myself that I was the one in charge. The maitre d' approached us as we walked in. He was a notoriously snobbish man named Jean-Luc. I stepped forward to give my name, prepared to be ushered to a decent, but not spectacular, table. Jean-Luc's eyes shifted past me, landing on Adalbert. The maitre d' physically jumped. He paled, his entire posture snapping into a rigid bow. Mr. James, we didn't know you were joining us this evening. I stopped dead. I stared at Jean-Luc, then at Adalbert. Adalbert looked vaguely annoyed. He adjusted his collar. Just a quiet dinner, Jean-Luc. My wife made the reservation under Phillips. Of course, sir. Right away. The private alcove. Immediately. I followed them through the restaurant in a state of total bewilderment. Jean-Luc practically sprinted to pull Adalbert's chair out for him. We were seated in the best corner of the restaurant, secluded and opulent. What was that? I asked, leaning across the table the moment the waiter scurried away to fetch water. Adalbert opened the leather-bound menu. What was what? Jean-Luc just looked at you like you were the Pope. You're a mechanic from the south side." Adalbert didn't look up. "I do some work on his cars. He likes my service." It was a plausible excuse. Barely. But my heart was suddenly beating very fast. I watched Adalbert as he helped Leo cut a piece of bread, his movements precise and careful. A waiter arrived, placing a bottle of red wine on the table. "Compliments of the house, Mr. James." The 98. I knew wine. That bottle was $3,000. You don't comp a $3,000 bottle of wine for your mechanic. Before I could interrogate him further, Adalbert's cell phone buzzed. It was an older model, the screen slightly cracked. He checked the caller ID, sighed, and pressed it to his ear. "I thought I said no calls tonight," Adalbert said. His voice had shifted again, that same cold, authoritative timbre he had used with my mother. He listened for a moment. "I don't care what the zoning board said, David. Tell them the South Loop Development Project is moving forward. If the alderman complains, remind him who funded his last campaign." "Yes, handle it." He hung up, tossing the phone onto the table next to his bread plate. He looked up, catching me staring at him with wide, horrified eyes. "Zoning board," I whispered, my voice barely working. "South Loop Development. Adalbert, who exactly was on the phone?" Adalbert took a sip of his water. He looked at me, his grey eyes unreadable, completely devoid of the tired mechanic persona I had hired. The dim lighting threw sharp shadows across his face, making him look ruthless. "Just a client," he said evenly. "Eat your steak, Nari." I sat back, the air suddenly freezing in my lungs. My mother's words echoed in my head. "You have no idea who you are dealing with." I had run a background check, a basic one. Adalbert James, auto repair shop owner, clean record, struggling single father. But as I watched my new husband calmly slice into his steak, radiating a quiet, terrifying power, the horrifying truth began to dawn on me. I hadn't married a pawn to outmaneuver my mother. I had invited a wolf into the penthouse. Sleep refused to come. My penthouse was a sterile cavern of white marble and brushed steel, designed to look impressive rather than habitable. Tonight, the silence pressed against my eardrums, broken only by the faint, rhythmic hum of the central air conditioning and the distant wail of a police siren 30 floors below. Lying in the center of a king-sized bed, I stared at the ceiling. The faint scent of Adalbert's cheap, pine-scented bar soap had already infiltrated the hallway outside the guest wing. It was sharp, intrusive, completely out of place among my Joe Malone diffusers. Anger, hot and tight, coiled in my stomach. I hated being outmaneuvered. I grabbed my laptop from the nightstand, the screen illuminating the dark bedroom with a harsh, bluish glare. I didn't bother with Google. I logged directly into my corporate terminal and bypassed the standard public records, accessing the private investigator retainer account I used for opposition research. Typing his name felt like a concession. Adalbert James. Rows of data populated the screen. I scrolled past the auto repair shop, past the standard tax returns. I dug into the holding companies registered to the address of his garage. A shell company called AC Holdings. A subsidiary named James Trust. My eyes burned as I followed the digital paper trail, clicking through property deeds, stock transfers, and acquisition histories. Bile rose in my throat, tasting acidic and sharp. Adalbert didn't just own a mechanic shop. He owned the land beneath it. He owned the entire block. He owned 3 commercial skyscrapers in the financial district. a controlling stake in the city's largest private equity firm, and the very real estate development firm my mother had been trying to partner with for the last 2 years. The net worth flashing on my screen wasn't just millions. It was in the billions. He had sat in that duct-taped diner booth, let me offer him a $50,000 monthly salary, and watched me play the benevolent savior. He had mocked me. Throwing the laptop onto the mattress, I marched out of the bedroom. The hardwood floor was freezing against my bare feet. I didn't care. I shoved open the heavy oak door to the guest wing without knocking. Adalbert was awake. He sat in the leather armchair by the window, wearing a pair of grey sweatpants and a white t-shirt. He held a glass of amber liquid, the ice clinking softly as he turned his head to look at me. The city lights cast harsh, angular shadows across his face. "Condition 3, I snapped, my voice cracking the quiet of the room. "You said no lies." Adalbert didn't flinch. He took a slow sip of his drink, swallowing audibly. The smell of expensive bourbon drifted toward me, mixing with the pine soap. "I never lied to you, Nari. You made an assumption. I merely allowed you to keep it." "You let me offer you an allowance," I yelled, stepping closer, my hands curling into fists at my sides. "You sat there in your filthy jacket and let me think I was rescuing some desperate, struggling father. You're Adalbert James of James Trust. You own half the commercial grid of Chicago. Why the hell are you fixing carburetors in a slum?" He stood up. The relaxed posture vanished, replaced by the heavy, imposing presence I had witnessed at the courthouse. He closed the distance between us, stopping just inches away. I had to tilt my head up to meet his eyes. Up close, I could see the exhaustion etched deep into the corners of his mouth. "Because my wife died in a car I paid someone else to maintain," he said. His voice was completely flat, devoid of emotion, which somehow made it vastly more terrifying. Because sitting in a boardroom making rich people richer didn't stop a brake line from snapping. I bought the garage to learn how to fix things with my own hands. I kept it because it's the only place Leo sees me as a father instead of a walking checkbook. The anger drained out of me, leaving a hollow, scraping guilt in its wake. I swallowed hard, stepping back. My heel caught the edge of the rug, and I stumbled slightly. Adalbert reached out, his rough fingers wrapping around my forearm to steady me. His grip was warm and solid. He didn't let go immediately. "Then why sign my contract?" I asked, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "If you didn't need the money, why tie yourself to me and my mother's mess?" Adalbert finally released my arm, turning back to the window. He looked out at the jagged skyline. Villette Phillips spent the last decade trying to buy out the South Loop properties. When she realized I wouldn't sell, she went after my suppliers, tried to squeeze my tenants, made life a bureaucratic nightmare. I don't care about her corporate games, but she made it personal. He turned his head, locking his pale grey eyes on mine. "You offered me a front row seat to her destruction, Nari. You handed me the legal authority to walk into her boardroom as a member of the Phillips family. I didn't marry you for the money. I married you for the access." My chest tightened. It was a business transaction, purely predatory, exactly what I had initiated. I should have felt relieved that our motives aligned, but a strange, pathetic ache flared beneath my ribs. I squashed it instantly. "Fine," I said, lifting my chin, forcing my spine into rigid alignment. "We have a common enemy. The board meeting is tomorrow at 9. Villette thinks she's voting me out because my marriage violates the morality and stability clause of my CEO contract. She thinks I married a vagrant." Adalbert picked up his glass, draining the last of the bourbon. "Then tomorrow we let her realize she invited a predator into the hen house. Get some sleep, Nari. You look terrible." "Go to hell, Adalbert," I muttered, turning on my heel. "I've been there," he replied softly to my retreating back. "It looks a lot like your mother's office." Friday morning tasted like stale coffee and adrenaline. My suit was a sharp, unforgiving black. I tied my hair back so tightly it pulled at my scalp, an anchor of physical pain to keep me focused. The elevator ride to the top floor of Phillips Industries felt agonizingly slow. The gears ground beneath my feet, a heavy mechanical churn that mirrored the nausea in my stomach. I pushed through the glass doors of the boardroom. The air inside was notoriously dry, smelling of ozone, expensive leather, and Villette's gardenia perfume. 12 board members sat around the massive mahogany table. Villette sat at the head, wearing a triumphant, razor-thin smile. Richard Gallagher sat to her right, looking incredibly pleased with himself. "Nari," Villette said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "How gracious of you to join us for your own execution. Please, have a seat." I didn't sit. I walked to the opposite end of the table, placing my hands flat on the polished wood. The surface was freezing. "Call the meeting to order, Villette. Let's get this over with." Villette nodded to the corporate secretary. "As majority shareholder, I propose a vote of no confidence in our current CEO, Nari Phillips. Her recent erratic personal decisions, namely a sudden marriage to a financially unstable auto mechanic, demonstrate a severe lack of judgment. This jeopardizes the Gallagher merger and the future of this company." Richard Gallagher leaned forward, interlacing his fingers. "We run a respectable operation, Nari. We can't merge our logistics network with a company run by someone who associates with the gutter." I let a beat of silence stretch across the room. I listened to the scratching of the secretary's pen. I watched the board members avoid my gaze. They were cowards, all of them. "Before you vote," a voice echoed from the doorway. Every head snapped toward the entrance. Adalbert stood there. He didn't look like the man from the diner. He didn't look like the man in the guest room in sweatpants. He wore a bespoke, charcoal grey suit that draped perfectly across his broad shoulders. A platinum watch caught the overhead light. His posture was terrifyingly relaxed, radiating the casual arrogance of a man who owned the oxygen in the room. Villette stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. "Security. Remove this man immediately. How did he even get past the lobby?" "I own the building," Adalbert said mildly, stepping into the room. He walked slowly down the length of the table, his heavy footsteps absorbing the silence. Richard Gallagher frowned, his face flushing dark red. "Who the hell are you?" Adalbert paused behind my chair. He placed a heavy, warm hand on my shoulder. The contact sent a jolt of electricity down my spine, grounding me instantly. "Adalbert James," he introduced himself, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. "CEO of James Trust, and, as of yesterday afternoon, the new majority debt holder for Gallagher Logistics." The color completely drained from Gallagher's face. "That's impossible. Our debt is held by a subsidiary of my equity firm," Adalbert interrupted smoothly. "You're over-leveraged, Richard. You missed 2 payments last quarter. I bought your paper. If you vote against my wife today, I will call the debt in tomorrow. I will liquidate your trucks, fire your drivers, and turn your warehouses into parking lots." Silence slammed into the room, a thick, suffocating vacuum. Villette stared at Adalbert, her jaw trembling slightly. The gardenia perfume suddenly smelled sour, rancid. "James," she whispered, the realization finally connecting the dots in her brain. "You're the James who blocked the South Loop project." "I am," Adalbert agreed. He moved his hand from my shoulder, sliding a thick legal document across the mahogany table toward her. It stopped exactly inches from her perfectly manicured fingers. "And because my wife and I have merged our assets under our marital agreement, her minority shares in Phillips Industries are now backed by the James Trust Capital, which means, Villette, you no longer have the financial leverage to force a buyout. You are officially outmatched." Villette looked down at the document. Her hands hovered over it, shaking. For the first time in 30 years, I saw my mother look small. The pristine armor of her Chanel suit couldn't hide the absolute defeat slumping her shoulders. "You planned this," she hissed at me, her eyes venomous. I looked back at her, feeling absolutely nothing. No fear, no desperate need for her approval. Just a cold, cynical emptiness. "I told you, Mother. I refuse to be leveraged." "The vote of no confidence is withdrawn," one of the board members stammered quickly, shuffling his papers. Clearly, the James Alliance is highly beneficial to Phillips Industries. "Meeting adjourned," I said sharply. They scrambled. The board members practically tripped over each other to leave the room. Gallagher bolted without a word. Villette lingered for a fraction of a second, opening her mouth as if to speak, but Adalbert just stared at her with dead, grey eyes until she turned and walked out, the glass door shutting quietly behind her. We were alone. The hum of the air conditioner returned. I leaned back against the edge of the table, my legs suddenly too weak to hold my own weight. I squeezed my eyes shut, letting out a long, shaky breath. The migraine I had been holding back for 3 days finally broke over my temples. "You okay?" Adalbert asked. His voice had softened, dropping the corporate edge. I opened my eyes. He had loosened his tie, the perfect knot now slightly crooked. The sight of his imperfection was strangely comforting. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice raw, stripping away the CEO persona. "I spent my whole life being terrified of her, and now, it's just over." Adalbert stepped closer. He didn't offer a platitude. He didn't tell me I was brave. He just pulled a silver flask from his inner suit pocket, unscrewed the cap, and handed it to me. "Bourbon?" I asked, eyeing the metal. "Cheap stuff," he said, a faint, genuine smile touching his mouth. "Tastes like battery acid." I took the flask. The metal was warm from his body heat. I took a long swallow. It burned going down, a harsh, grounding fire in my throat. I coughed, handing it back. "So," I rasped, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand. "What happens now, Adalbert James? We have a 2-year contract. Am I supposed to pretend to be a stepmother while you pretend to be my husband?" Adalbert capped the flask. He looked at me, really looked at me, tracing the dark circles under my eyes, the messy hair escaping my tight bun, the imperfect, cynical ruin of my carefully constructed life. "Leo needs help with his math homework," Adalbert said simply. "And I need someone who isn't afraid to tell me when I'm being an idiot. We don't have to pretend, Nari. We just have to survive each other." I looked at the greasy smudge of fingerprints he had left on the pristine mahogany boardroom table. It was a stain my mother would have hated. I smiled. It was a small, broken thing, but it was real. I think I can manage that. If you enjoyed this raw, cynical take on a marriage of convenience, don't just keep it to yourself. Smash that like button, share this video with your friends who love a good plot twist, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more deeply human stories. Leave a comment below telling me which moment made your jaw drop. Your support helps bring more unpredictable, emotional storytelling to life. Ring the bell, and I'll see you in the next one.